Hello everyone, I'm Pastor Chris and I serve the First Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We are an open and affirming church working to serve this community. If you're looking for a place to worship, I'd love for you to come and visit us. We meet at 10:55 a.m. at 907 East Main Street in Murfreesboro. Our goal is that you feel welcome here. Today's message comes from the book of James, chapter 1, verses 17 through 27. Here's what that passage says. Every generous act of giving, with every perfect gift, is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave birth to us by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. You must understand this, my beloved brothers and sisters. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for human anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they're like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. My sermon title today is Godly Giving. I begin today with a poem by the American poet Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. I had an unusual call earlier this week as some group was doing a survey of pastors, and I got the impression that it was of pastors across the nation, but it seemed like maybe this was the first time this interviewer had ever seen these questions. Now, I imagine it must be hard for someone to have that job. I mean, how often must they get someone on the phone who simply says no or hangs up on them? But anyway, there was a set of questions in the middle of the survey that I found to be really interesting. I was asked 3 questions in a row about the idea of material wealth coming from being in right relationship with God, or of God rewarding the faithful with money. It seemed odd to me to spend 3 questions on the same topic when so many other topics like social issues or outreach issues were practically ignored. As I've thought about it, I realized these questions were asked because of the great emphasis many Christians seem to have on the idea of material wealth. You've probably heard of or seen church services that emphasize giving to the church or ministry they're affiliated with so that the person giving at home will experience this great growth in wealth. Or maybe you've heard promises that if you'll only pray this way, or read this text correctly, or get your heart or your mind or your soul or your checkbook right, then you will be the recipient of great wealth from God. If you've been holding out hope for that type of blessing, I'm sorry to tell you that it isn't biblical. Now, I admit there are certain circumstances in which God makes these types of promises, particularly in passages like the story of Solomon, who, when he asked for wisdom, God offered to give him material wealth and many other things also. But it isn't the overall message of the Bible, and it certainly isn't the message of the gospel. I mean, in the Gospels, Jesus himself is shown to be absolutely poor. If closeness to God was a factor in earthly wealth, we would expect Jesus to be the richest man ever. And Jesus then promises his closest followers that they too will suffer like him. And that's not an easy message, and the rewards are long in coming. But then again, do we love God because God's going to give us stuff? Do we serve a church to enrich ourselves? Are we believers in order to receive a reward? I think most of us would say no to those questions. The book of James is an unusual book. It's considered a universal book to all the Christians at that time, but it has some very specific language about wealth that seems to be to a specific audience. Starting with chapter 1, verse 9, James writes, "Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field. Its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. It is the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away." And much of the book is spent railing against the rich, suggesting they're not true members of the community. And maybe there weren't any rich people in this community. I mean, you can imagine if James spends most of his time telling people who are rich that they're bad, they might not stick around for too long. But it isn't the fact that people are rich that James objects to. It's the fact that they remain rich while other people remain poor. If a member of the community doesn't have enough, why should there be a member of the community who has more than they need? Where's the love of sibling in that? What does it even mean to be in community if that community does not care for the neediest members of the community? And if we remain rich while we watch someone else in need, how can we consider that we love God and love our neighbor? James writes, "Every generous act of giving, with every perfect gift, is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." James writes this to remind us that our greatest goal is to be imitators of God. And if we look at who God is and what God has done for the universe, we can see that God is a generous giver. It's different from our giving because God is inexhaustible, unlike my bank account. But the message is still there. James rejects the notion that God brought evil into the world or that God puts people in bad situations to test them or to watch them suffer. James says that happens because of human greed and jealousy, not because of God. God intends for people to have fullness of life, and God has always intended for us to care for one another in such a way that we may all have abundance. If I'm right that our greatest goal is to be imitators of God, and one of the greatest things we see God doing is giving to the universe, then we should be moved to give as well. Sometimes that will take the form of our wealth, but other times it may be something else. Maybe it's our time. Maybe it's our effort. Maybe it's a simple act of kindness in the midst of a harsh world. If the rich have received a blessing, it's only so that we can give more for the flourishing of others. I know that's a hard thing to live and to hear in a world that is so wealth-oriented. Here's the thing, though. We give because we want to give. We give because it's the right thing to do. We give because it's like God, and we want to be like God. We give because seeing others in need is abhorrent to us. When we have such opportunities, we are meant to meet them with joy and happiness, not reluctantly giving from our abundance. And remember, I've already said that giving is not just about monetary gifts. Every good gift is something that comes from God. And when we give of ourselves in that way, we are honoring God. If, for example, we were to give in order to get more, that's not giving. That's investment. That's a gamble against God's beneficence. That's not the kind of giving that God honors. God honors gifts given for the good of another simply because it will be for the good of another. Much like Dickinson was writing about in her poem. The gift of stopping one heart from breaking, the gift of keeping one life from aching, the gift of easing another who is in pain, the gift of helping a tiny bird back into its nest. These are godly gifts. They're not given to see a return on investment, at least not in the way the world expects returns on investment. They're given to see another come back to life, or be rescued, or be cared for, or simply to make the world a brighter place. Every generous act of giving, with every perfect gift, is from above. God bless you as you seek to give of yourself for the good of the world. Amen.